Dungeon Meshi tricks you from the get-go. Though its initial few minutes are a heated, doomed battle, everything about the first episode suggests a light, irreverent comedy with some classic fantasy elements. From the plucky music, the quirky main cast, and Trigger's light and flowy animation style, you'd be forgiven for thinking this was going to be cooking with Konosuba. And that's not entirely wrong. Dungeon Meshi is fun. It's filled with great action, comedic beats, good-natured characters, strong animation, everything that would make it a standard fun time. And then, just like an onion, Dungeon Meshi pulls back its layers, and we start to see a dash of body horror, a sprinkle of heartbreak, a helping of trauma, and a side of found family. Ryoko Kui's fantastically crafted dungeon holds many secrets, but its real treasure is how it connects and facilitates its world and its characters in a way that far exceeds its humble start. Dungeon Meshi tells the journey of Tall Man Laos, the elf Marcele, the half-foot Chilchuk, and the dwarf Senshi, and I apologize for butchering all of those names, as they journey to the bottom of the mysterious dungeon to stop a mad magician and save Laos' sister, Fallen. Fallen was eaten by a red dragon during the party's most recent defeat, a battle that normally they wouldn't have had nearly as much trouble with if it had been for the fact that the entire party was running on little to no sleep and no food. And though Fallen was able to save her brother and her party, she was lost in the process. Having lost all of their items and money, and down 2 essential party members, Laos convinces Marcele and Chilchuk to venture into the dungeon with the gear on their back and sustain themselves on the monsters and the plants that call the dungeon their home. Aided by the dungeon monster connoisseur Senshi, who has essentially made the upper floors of the dungeon his home and personal grocer, all 4 set off to fight, cook, and explore their way back to the Red Dragon before it can fully digest Fallen. The premise and the plot of Dungeon Meshi is straightforward enough, with a clear end goal in mind: find and save Fallen. Most episodes are split into 2 sections based on the different foods Team Laos ends up prepping, to the vehement disgust of Marcele. And I'm going to say Marcele so frequently, I'm so sorry. And though there are hints of something larger creeping behind the scenes of the anime, such as the arrival of the elves and the potential prophecy involving a winged lion, most of Dungeon Meshi is just plain episodic and narratively light. It definitely makes the show a lot easier to binge in the early episodes. But what Dungeon Meshi lacks initially in a through-line plot, it more than makes up for it in its characters, themes, and world building. Let's start with the characters. The group of Laos, Marcele, and Chilchuk, and Senshi, and eventually Izumi, who is relatively new to the party, so I'll leave her out now until a Season 2 review, has the makings of a classic D&D party and is probably one of my favorite bands of friends I've seen in a while. Marcele is the party's mage, a strong, learned magician with a love for magic and Fallen, though she hates eating monsters and is frankly tired of Senshi and Laos' antics. Despite all that, she is just as committed to saving Fallen as Laos and is willing to do literally the most illegal things imaginable to save Fallen and to uncover the secrets of the dungeon and its black magic. Chilchuk is a professional, a divorced father of 3, a lockpick and often the straight man of the group. Though he has an air of professionalism and tries his best to stay detached from the whole situation, he is undeniably a reliable friend, cool under pressure and loyal to a fault, even when it doesn't benefit him. Senshi is a sweetheart, quite frankly. He loves cooking, and he loves food, and he loves looking after the quote-unquote little ones, with almost a fervent obsession which is both admirable and undeniably steeped in trauma. He is good-natured, willing to learn, not some grizzled, jaded veteran that he could be, but instead a parent and a friend of the group who he has grown to care for deeply. And they are all rounded out by Laos, who might be the most interesting main character of this anime season. Laos is, to everyone around him, except maybe his sister, an anomaly. He is the default leader of this team, a sword-wielding knight with a heart of gold and a mind constantly on monsters. He has an obsession with them ever since he got a book as a little kid detailing their traits and how to cook them, and the rescue mission, despite being mainly to save Fallen, has also given him the perfect excuse to try cooking monsters. He loves everything about them, but unlike Senshi, who has a more interpersonal and intimate monster knowledge, making him more of like a loving conservationist, Laos is more of akin to a textbook zookeeper. He loves monsters, but he is far more understanding of how dangerous they are and that they should be treated as such, no matter how excited he gets around them. And he is undeniably knowledgeable, as much as the resources around him allow him to be. That's why he's a great complement to Senshi. Along with loving monsters, Laos is a devoted brother and a friend, even when they may not think of him the same way. Though Fallen was the one lost to the dragon, I wouldn't be surprised if Laos went back into the dungeon to save any of his party members, and to eat monsters. And that's why it's heartbreaking to see some of those he thought of as friends treat him as either an incapable child or someone they despise. But you understand a little bit why. Laos is terrible at social cues, he's fairly impulsive, he makes decisions that others would find odd or suspicious, and he has no qualms with making a fool of himself. He's pragmatic to a fault, and while that's off-putting to some people, make no mistake, Laos is no airhead. He's not stupid, he's not incapable. Though anime tropes might suggest otherwise to an extent, Lao's pragmatism, knowledge, and sheer drive to do whatever it takes to save his sister and to keep his team alive despite, and let me make this absolutely clear, being just a regular dude in a dungeon full of dryads, dragons, sea monsters, ghosts, killer frogs, mermaids, and more, is inhuman. He has earned his title as party leader many times over without ever letting go of that childlike wonder that has been with him since the beginning, no matter how dire and no matter how dangerous the situation gets. I'm also happy that, and please correct me in the comments if I'm incorrect, many people with autism who watch Dungeon Meshi seem to identify with Laos as a positive, even heroic representation. And I'm generally not one to talk about this, as I am not autistic myself and I'm not closely related to anybody who is, but I've seen such an overwhelming discussion of it online, and there seems to be at least one other work by this author that deals with male main characters with very similar traits as Laos, that I would not be surprised at all if this was intentional. Regardless, while I sing praise of Laos, each of the party members in this group are integral to their success and survival. Marcelie with her magic and knowledge of the dungeon, Chilchuck with his ears, eyes, and lockpicking skills, and Senshi with his practical cooking knowledge. All of them make up a perfect team. And what's also great about Dungeon Meshi is that these 4 characters that we get to know barely scratch the surface of the plethora of different faces, people, and motivations in the story. There's Kabru's party, which I particularly like. There's the foreign elves, I believe they're called the Cardinals. There's 2 separate parties from Laos's former members, the Orcs. All of these characters named, I believe, and given at least a minor characterization. It's just a whole story brimming with A+ character design. Every race looks distinct, and every member of each race looks distinct from each other without losing their base traits. Everyone wears practical armor, wields fairly realistic weaponry, and has features and clothes that inform you of their nature before they even speak. And generally, these body proportions and the people that you see aren't some very generic anime look. They look good. They look like people, and they move like people, which is great to see. I was also told that Ryoku plays a lot of Baldur's Gate 3 and other fantasy games, and that doesn't surprise me in the least. The entire aesthetic of Dungeon Meshi, while not unique to fantasy, is very well crafted and reminds me so much of a video game it's insane. The scavenging, the crafting, the levels of the dungeon and the many monsters. But what I love most about this dungeon, beyond the being just like an ancient lost civilization, which is really cool, is the fact that it's an ecosystem. It has plants, animals, bugs, spaces on every food chain, and different ways creatures interact with each other naturally. It has ways to live off the land and ways to exploit it. More often than not, each meal that is cooked within the dungeon is with fruits, vegetables, and meat harvested from local wildlife in particular ways that either Senshi has discovered over many years or the crew stumbles upon. And they also even use items and traps and aspects of the dungeon itself to cook and prepare some of these creatures. And no part of the monster ever really goes to waste. They will save and reuse eggs, meats, vegetables. They will fashion clothes and weapons from creatures. I love how Senshi wears the same frog skin boots for a large portion of the latter half of the show after they originally encountered these killer frogs. Our crew is an example of explorers who are able to live off the land, and their knowledge of cooking not only keeps them fed, but saves their asses on multiple occasions. Because eating a meal, just cooking and eating food, is not a separate, isolated event in Dungeon Meshi or even our own lives, no matter how much we take it for granted. And Speaking of the meal, Dungeon Meshi meals are pretty. I don't watch a lot of food-related anime, no food wars or the like, but I really do love how monsters and their anatomy and real cooking techniques and advice are given each episode to create actually appealing and creative food, from dragon burgers to ghost ice cream and many more non-American stuff. And Trigger does a great job animating each of these characters' cooking techniques, from Senshi's practiced knife skills to Marcela's exasperated attempts and Laos's overall fascination with every aspect of the cooking process. These meals are often accompanied by lighthearted music and give us, the viewers, a break from some of the heavier and actiony scenes of the show. And the show, by the way, does get heavy at times. Dungeon Meshi is no philosophical masterpiece, but it doesn't shy away from uncomfortable conversations. For example, in this dungeon, a person can be revived if they die, so long as their body is intact and their soul is retrievable and unmuddied by the dungeon. But obviously, spoiler warning right here, Fallen dies. She is killed and eaten and digested in a way that under any normal circumstances, the dungeon would not just give her back. And while in the moment, Marcela does something drastic with the approval of Laos to revive Fallen, that decision to revive her using black magic is not only taboo to that world, it goes against even Senshi's own beliefs about when a person's soul should be left to rest. Hell, there's an entire civilization hidden in the dungeon of people who literally cannot die, and death to them seems like a relief. Fallen's resurrection not only is morally questionable, but the subsequent series of events afterwards have made not only the dungeon a more dangerous place for everyone, but has the potential to put the entire island it is on at risk. And the pragmatist in me says that what Laos' team did was wrong. But the heart in me sees Marcela and Laos' love for Fallen and how important she is to both of them, and there's no way I would have done anything different if that was my little sister. To be eaten by monsters, to eat monsters, is one more right than the other? Is it not all survival? Who gets to eat? Who gets to consume? Who must die or suffer for that to happen? None of these questions are certain. None of them have a correct answer, and I don't think Dungeon Meshi is trying to answer them at all, more just ask them. But I do think the show is trying to say something. I think it's taking this journey of Laos and his party and his sister and the history that this dungeon is leading to. I do believe it is trying to say something, and this is my best guess. In Dungeon Meshi, friendship is important. In Dungeon Meshi, food is important. Lack of both is the reason many adventurers die in this dungeon. Many are abandoned. Many lose out on their ambition. Food is nourishment in Dungeon Meshi. Food in Dungeon Meshi means understanding one's environment, respecting it to your advantage but not exploiting it to the point of harm. Food in Dungeon Meshi is family, cooking and eating together, no matter how extravagant or humble the meal is, no matter whether the people you have met here are old friends or new ones. A meal is better with family. Food is emotional. It celebrates success. It calms one after hardships. It is cathartic, and in its most pure form, it can be closure. Food is hope, even in the darkest moments, because to eat is to live, a conscious decision to keep existing, to keep fighting in those darkest moments until they don't seem so dark anymore. Food is a lot of things in Dungeon Meshi, but at that pinnacle, food is hope, especially with the last episode that we've just seen, which ends on an oddly hopeful note, where Laos plans on what might be the greatest meal of any generation, and how that might just save his sister, even after everything that's happened. Food is important. Every character in Dungeon Meshi eats. Everyone hungers for something, whether that be family, knowledge, friendship, survival. And that is at the root of this dungeon, this prophecy. Adventurers risk their lives in this unnatural dungeon where death can be evaded, where the walls turn, where the promise of eternal riches and powers exist, where an entire ecosystem exists in between a state of both the natural and the unnatural, where a former kingdom fell for reasons that we do not yet understand, where a grieving wizard does what he can to not be alone. It takes place in a world where races are differentiated not only by their characteristics but by their lifespans, where racism and slavery and hardship exist outside of this island that seems so secluded from everything but is clearly not, or at least not any longer. The world of Dungeon Meshi is far bigger than the dungeon. The dungeon itself is far bigger than what we realize in the 24 episodes it is in, and most importantly, Dungeon Meshi's people, its characters, Laos, Marseille, Chilchuck, and Senshi, are far more complex than their archetypes, than even what they consume and what they make. Together, they create a meal that is greater than the sum of its parts. There is more here than I can even say in this video, even as I tag on extra pieces at the end, but I'll try to summarize my closing thoughts as succinctly as possible. I believe that Dungeon Meshi is, at its very moment, a 7 out of 10 anime with a 8 to 9 out of 10 fan base. It's amazing to see how much people love this show, and I love this show, but I do believe if they nail season 2 that Dungeon Meshi will be a 9 to 10 out of 10 anime. With all the out of context screenshots I've seen, and considering the manga has already ended on its author's own terms, I have no reason to expect anything less. Fantasy anime at this moment is in such an amazing spot because shows like this and like Frieren have made it fun to be a fantasy fan again in anime. And after everything that I've had so far, as filling as it is, I am undoubtedly hungry for more. I can't wait for season 2. Hi, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video or want to watch more anime videos in the future, please consider liking, commenting, maybe even subscribing. Also, just throwing any kind of comment in the bottom helps out with the algorithm like immensely. It can be stupid. Anything helps, and I appreciate it. Other than that, if you're interested in watching me finally debut and stream again on Twitch in the future for games like Pikmin 4, Elden Ring, Armored Core 6, other fun stuff, and Smash Bros, a ton of Smash Bros, please consider following me on Twitch, and you can find the description for that in below, I think, if YouTube kept the description in the same spot it normally does. I don't know. Regardless, thank you again so much for watching. Dungeon Meshi has been great. Can't wait for season 2. And one last time, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.